So I want to talk to you about a use case that I suspect is a pretty common scenario that many of you are likely dealing with. So let's go ahead and just get right into that today. So let me start with where things actually stand. So 91% of developers are now using AI coding tools. And 41% of all AI code written globally at this point is AI generated, or it's generated with the assistance of AI at this point. Now, to give you some additional numbers here, only 24% of AI projects have adequate security controls in place. Meanwhile, 82% of executives say that secure, trustworthy AI is essential to their organization. And that gap is what executives say they want and what's actually happening, and that's exactly where the risk lives. And just to put the scale into context a little bit, we're talking about a $4 billion, B as in billion, dollar market in 2025. AI coding tools are the single largest AI use case in the enterprise. So what exactly are these tools doing that make this a governance problem? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So from here, let's see. Let's use this. So here's what most AI governance conversations miss. When people think about AI coding tools, they picture autocomplete. You can start typing, the tool suggests the next line, there's a chat window where you can ask questions. It's passive, it is helpful, but fundamentally, it's waiting for a human to tell it what to do next. However, that is just not what these tools are anymore. GitHub Copilot's coding agent, for example, which has been generally available since September of 2025, you can assign it a GitHub issue, and it will autonomously write the code, edit all of the files across your entire code base, run tests, and open a pull request. And that's all without a human writing a single line of code. And GitHub's own documentation describes it as operating without stopping for approval between steps. These tools connect to Jira Now, to your CI/CD pipelines, and to external APIs. They operate in what GitHub calls autopilot mode. That is an agent, and that changes everything about how you govern it. So next, what I want to do is I want to talk about the 4 steps that are needed to actually govern an AI agent. So first, we need to ask the question, well, what even is the agent? What agent is it? What vendor created it? What are its capabilities? And what data was used to ultimately train that agent? Once we know the technology that we want to use, at that point in time, we have to ask ourselves what the actual use case is, and we have to figure out how it is actually used in the business. And then from there, we can figure out what the actual task does. And I'm going to stand over here so I can see the slides a little bit better. We can see for whom it should be used and the environment that it should operate in. And this is also where we can decide what policies apply, which addresses question number 3. Because if you have a single model being used in 2 different use cases, it's very possible that the risk level of those 2 use cases could be substantially different, which is why the governance at the level of the use case is so critical. And then last, who approved it? We need to make sure that we are following all of the appropriate approval processes and that all of the appropriate stakeholders have ultimately seen all of the appropriate details to ultimately approve our use case. So next, I want to go ahead and introduce AI Navigator and talk to you a little bit more about that. So SAS AI Navigator is SAS's purpose-built platform for governing AI systems at enterprise scale. It gives organizations one governed system of record for every AI agent and model, every use case, every policy, and every approval decision. In fact, a few years ago, within SAS, we were having our own conversations, and we realized that we needed a tool like this because we were starting to use AI more across the business, and we wanted to make sure that we were governing our AI appropriately. And it turned out that once we actually started speaking to potential customers, it turned out it wasn't just an us problem, but it turned out that other folks wanted this too. So that is one of the reasons that we ended up hopping into this. So let me go back, because I realized I jumped forward quickly there. So the other thing I want to mention is you can inventory and track all of the agents and models in use across your organization, and you can define the scope and the use cases. One important thing that I want to mention here is you do not have to have SAS models to be able to use this. You can use models that were developed in Databricks, models that were developed just in Python. Alternatively, you could also use this to manage all of your models. I think I have an automated. That happened to me earlier. Okay, this is fun. It helps you to make sure that you are, what was I just saying? Sorry. Oh, yes. You can manage all of the models regardless of the source. And ultimately, you can make sure that you're governing all of those in the same way, and you have a single unified view of all of the assets within your organization. So now I'm going to just describe the actual demo scenario that we're going to walk through today. So before we do that, the agent that we're going to use today is the GitHub Copilot. So the assumption here is that it's already in use across your software development teams, but there's no formal record of what it's authorized to do, for whom, or under what conditions. No policies have been applied at this point, and no one has formally signed off on its use. Your organization's AI leadership is concerned that agents like GitHub Copilot aren't being properly governed, so they've made AI Navigator the tool of choice for that. So now it's on you to actually get all this content into here. So now I realize that many of you in this room may be data scientists, you may be business decision makers, engineers, technical folks. So ultimately, you probably won't be the person that is going to ultimately approve the use case, but you are the person that makes the approval possible. You're also the one that gets the agent into the system, builds the use case, and then works with legal to figure out which policies should apply, and then brings the right stakeholders in to make the final call. And that's exactly the scenario that AI Navigator will help us address. All right. So let's go ahead and start the demo here. So here's the homepage for SAS AI Navigator. And here you can see all of our use cases, models, and agents that are being managed by the organization, as well as the number of policies that we have. So we're going to go ahead and add the agent that we've been using within our organization but have not yet been tracking. So it's very easy to add a model or a use case here. For the sake of the demo, I went ahead and pre-populated some of these fields just to make it a bit more quick. And then there are some other additional required fields that you have to populate. You just have to specify whether it's internal or external. You specify the vendor provider associated with that agent, the stage of the model, which in this case, we're going to say is at the evaluation level. And we're also going to set the usage authorization to pending. So at this point in time, that's the information that is needed to even create the agent to get it inventoried into the system. And from here, now we can see that our agent exists and is in our inventory. Now that we have the agent within AI Navigator, now we can go ahead and actually create our software development use case. We go through the same wizard, and we go ahead and we add the details about how this use case will ultimately be used, who should have access to it, and then the additional deployment geography details. And then from here, we have the option to apply some policies that apply to our use case. So in this case, we can see this AI code assistant governance policy is certainly going to be applicable, as is our responsible AI deployment policy, cybersecurity policy, as well as this external policy. And then we have to set an approver before we can finally create the use case. And then once the use case has been created, then we can open it up in AI Navigator. We can then navigate to our Asset Relationships tab, and we can search for the agent that we just created. And then it's simply just dragging it and attaching it to our use case. So now we can see that this specific agent powers our use case. We can see information about the data used to train the agent, as well as the development information for that agent all in one place. So for the Applied Policies tab, at this point in time is when you would work with your compliance and legal teams to get an understanding of ultimately how your use case should be classified for each of your policies. And you can either look at the full view of the policies from this page. Otherwise, there are these very small demo cards that pop up to let you know more about the actual policy. And then once you've worked with your legal and compliance folks to ultimately figure out what the risk needs to be for your use case, then you can go ahead and select those appropriate risk classifications, which you'll notice are all specific to that policy because we know that different policies use different terminology. Once we have those policies applied to our use case, there are 4 sets of questions in this case that come along with that application. So here, what I could do is if I was somebody that was trying to come in here to provide an answer to a question, I would scroll down and look at all of my use case questions. And then once I've provided my answers, I can submit each of those to be approved. Once I've gone through and submitted all of my answers, then the person that is the designated approver for this use case will be notified, and they'll be able to come in here and then ultimately approve the answers to each of these questions, which is one of the steps in getting your use case to be ultimately approved, and then as a result, deployed. And you can see that once it's been approved, the person that approved the question is also listed with that response, and it's also shown along with the date that that question was approved, so you have that from an auditing perspective. Once you've gone through and done all of your due diligence, that is when you can go and set this use case to be approved. You can add in approval status notes to let other users understand what has all been reviewed so that this use case could be appropriately approved. And then after providing your approval status notes, then you can go to the approval status drop-down field, set it to approved, and then we can ultimately deploy our use case. And then finally, we also have a change log. So this audits everything that happened to your use case along the way so that you have that audit trail in the event that you ever need it. And that is our use case. So let's just take a quick moment to look at what we just did. So GitHub Copilot went from a completely ungoverned agent to a completely approved use case in just a few short steps. We authorized the use of the agent. GitHub Copilot is now formally inventoried in AI Navigator. There's a record of what it is, who developed it, and what it can do. We defined the use case, a specific scoped business need, an AI-assisted software development use case. We linked the agent to that use case. We applied a few policies, which defined the guardrails and requirements that govern the use case. And finally, we submitted that fully configured use case for stakeholder review, and we got it approved. We have a fully governed use case. We know who owns it. The governance decisions are documented, so we have everything we need from an audit trail perspective. So, AI code assistants are absolutely not going away anytime soon. 91% of enterprise developers are already using them, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The tools are ahead of their governance, and that gap is not going to close on its own. So what you just saw is how organizations that are getting ahead of this problem are doing it. Before an incident, before an audit, before a regulator forces the conversation, AI Navigator gives you the structure to govern every agent, every use case, every policy, every approval in one place. So if you want to try AI Navigator for yourself, you can head to the Try Zone, which I believe is just around the corner over here, and you can get hands-on with it right away today. Otherwise, you can stop by the AI Navigator booth, and you can talk to me or my colleague Christy to learn more about AI Navigator. Alternatively, we're going to be doing a private preview that's going to start in the weeks following SaaS Innovate. And the idea is we want as many folks to participate in that as possible because we want to be able to get your feedback and understand exactly what needs you have so that we're making sure to develop a product that you all actually need. So scan the QR code to express interest in participating in that. Otherwise, we are going to be generally available this summer on the Azure Marketplace as a software as a service offering. And to make it clear, AI Navigator is completely separate from Baya. You could have never heard about SaaS in your entire life and go to the marketplace and purchase this and immediately get up and running without having ever heard of SaaS. So we wanted to make this as flexible as possible because we believe that every organization deserves to have robust AI governance. And that's all for me. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, thank you, Ali, for that. Any questions in the audience? All right, if not, we do have a question.
So at the moment that you deploy, what that actually means, like, is it triggering something else in SaaS, or is it just the end of the cycle inside of AI Navigator?
Yeah, so right now for GA, this is strictly informational. So one thing that we're working on for version 2 of this product is to be able to create connections to the source modeling platforms. So that's something that we heard right away from our customers when we were speaking with them about prioritizing features. So in the short term, that capability will not be there. In the longer term, again, we plan to give administrators the ability to configure those connections so that not only will there be a way to sort of have that dictate whether a model is deployed or not, but also will make it easier to get your models into AI Navigator in the first place. So you'll be able to connect to a very specific model repository and then just pull over all of the models that are there into AI Navigator.
About the policies, some of them will come with the product, or are you able to export or transfer some of these policies to reuse or share through companies? Yeah.
Great question. So there's going to be one policy that we're offering out of the box that SaaS developed internally that's based off of the NIST AI policy framework. Though what we are ultimately going to recommend is that you work with our policy partners. So we're working on setting up a handful of policy partners, and the idea is that they are going to be providing a number of policies, specifically ones that are driven by regulation, so that you can work directly with them to get those policies, and then those will get imported right into AI Navigator. And of course, that's just for external policies. The idea is it's a matter of taking your internal standards that you already have and then just translating those into a set of questions. Otherwise, the import process is very, very simple.